Jerome Washington stands in the airport terminal, watching as his entire fleet of planes sits motionless on the tarmac. His cell phone buzzes with frantic calls from board members and shareholders as stock prices plummet. "Sometimes respect costs more than money," he whispers, turning off his phone. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and redemption. The events you're about to witness will change how you think about standing up for yourself forever. Growing up in the South Side of Chicago, Jerome Washington knew hardship intimately. His mother worked 3 jobs to keep their apartment in a neighborhood where gunshots were as common as car horns. Despite these challenges, Jerome possessed something remarkable, an analytical mind that could see patterns and solutions where others saw only chaos. By age 12, Jerome was already investing the small amounts of money he earned from his paper route in stocks he researched at the public library. His first purchase of 3 shares in a tech startup netted him $47 in profit, which he immediately reinvested. While his friends played basketball after school, Jerome studied market trends and corporate structures, dreaming of a future beyond his circumstances. His academic performance earned him a full scholarship to Phillips Academy Andover, where he experienced his first real taste of wealth disparity and racial prejudice. As one of only 9 black students in his class, Jerome endured constant questioning of his legitimacy. Fellow students whispered that he was only there to fulfill a diversity quota. Teachers seemed surprised when he aced exams. Despite maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA, Jerome was advised to apply to state colleges rather than Ivy League universities. Ignoring this guidance, Jerome applied to Harvard and was accepted with another full scholarship. There, he double-majored in economics and computer science, graduating summa cum laude before continuing to Harvard Business School. His thesis on algorithmic pricing models in the transportation industry won national recognition and caught the attention of several major investment firms. But Jerome's post-graduation experience quickly exposed the limits of meritocracy. Despite his credentials, interviews at top financial institutions invariably ended with rejection letters containing vague references to cultural fit issues. One hiring manager, after several drinks at a networking event, admitted the truth: the old money clients just aren't comfortable with someone like you managing their portfolios. At Blackstone Capital, Jerome finally secured a position, but advancement proved elusive. While his white colleagues were fast-tracked to managing director roles, Jerome remained stuck in middle management despite consistently outperforming them. His investment strategies generated millions in profit, yet the credit often went to his supervisors. During his 5th year, Jerome overheard the CEO referring to him as "our token Harvard Negro" at the company Christmas party. The next day, Jerome resigned and cashed out his savings and investments, totaling just over $4 million. He had been developing a business plan for years, refining it each time he faced another closed door. The airline industry was ripe for disruption, dominated by legacy carriers with outdated business models, poor customer service, and inefficient route structures. Air Route Airlines was born from Jerome's frustration and vision. Starting with just 2 leased aircraft flying between Chicago and Atlanta, Jerome implemented his proprietary algorithm that optimized everything from fuel consumption to turnaround times. He hired flight attendants who had been rejected by other airlines for being too old or not fitting the image, discovering a wealth of experienced, grateful talent. His maintenance crews came primarily from military backgrounds, bringing discipline and thoroughness to aircraft safety. Within 5 years, Air Route expanded to 37 aircraft serving 23 cities. Unlike competitors who charged for every amenity, Jerome's model included reasonable comforts in the base fare while optimizing operational costs behind the scenes. The airline quickly developed a reputation for punctuality, fair pricing, and respectful treatment of passengers. When the pandemic hit, while other airlines took government bailouts and laid off thousands, Jerome implemented a profit-sharing program with employees who agreed to temporary pay reductions. Not a single Air Route employee lost their job, and when air travel resumed, their loyalty and motivation gave the airline a significant competitive advantage. By age 37, Jerome had transformed Air Route into the fifth largest carrier in the United States, worth over $12 billion. His innovation extended beyond business models to corporate culture. Air Route maintained the most diverse executive team in the industry and offered the most generous parental leave policy. The company's headquarters in Chicago's South Side brought hundreds of jobs to his old neighborhood. Aviation Week named Jerome Industry Disruptor of the Year, and Harvard Business Review published a case study on Air Route's revolutionary business practices. Forbes featured him on their cover as the Sky King, who had transformed air travel through mathematical precision and humanitarian principles. Yet despite his remarkable success, Jerome still experienced frequent reminders of America's racial prejudices. Security personnel followed him in high-end stores. Receptionists at business meetings directed him to service entrances. Flight attendants on competitors' airlines sometimes questioned whether he was in the correct cabin when he flew first class. Jerome developed a personal philosophy that guided both his business and life decisions: excellence and dignity above all. He believed that sustained success required not just intelligence and hard work but also self-respect that could not be compromised. This philosophy would soon be tested in ways he never anticipated. The Dubai Sovereign Investment Fund controlled over $300 billion in assets worldwide. For the past 6 months, Jerome and his team had been carefully cultivating a relationship with the fund's directors, positioning Air Route for a potential $3.5 billion investment that would fund the airline's international expansion. After dozens of preliminary meetings, financial disclosures, and strategy presentations, the fund's decision-makers were finally ready for a face-to-face meeting in New York. Jerome's phone rang at 5:30 that morning. Maya Patterson, his chief operating officer and Harvard classmate, was already fully caffeinated and buzzing with energy. "Tell me you're awake and reviewing the presentation," she said without preamble. Jerome smiled, glancing at the presentation he'd been annotating since 4 a.m. "I've added projections for the Singapore and London routes based on yesterday's fuel cost updates." "Good. The board is nervous about this meeting. Harrison called me twice yesterday suggesting we bring in an outside consultant to lead the presentation." Harrison Wilson was the oldest member of Air Route's board, a 72-year-old former airline executive who had initially been Jerome's mentor but increasingly seemed uncomfortable with the company's rapid growth under his leadership. "Let me guess," Jerome said, "he has a specific consultant in mind." "Old golf buddy? Ivy League connection?" "Got it in one," Maya replied. "Some retired United Airlines VP who's now doing consulting. Very experienced with international investors, according to Harrison. Very white, according to Harrison's unspoken preference," Jerome added. "The answer is no. We built this company. We'll represent it." After showering and selecting his lucky navy Brioni suit, Jerome headed to the kitchen where his housekeeper had prepared his usual pre-meeting meal: steel-cut oatmeal with blueberries, scrambled egg whites, and black coffee. His phone buzzed with a text from Devin Harris, Air Route's chief financial officer and final member of what industry insiders called the Trinity, leading the airline's meteoric rise. "Emirates flight attendant just gave me side-eye for requesting coffee before takeoff. Their service standard slipping. We'll do better with our international routes." Jerome texted back, taking notes on competitor weaknesses. Smart man. Devin had flown to New York the previous day to prepare the meeting venue and accommodate last-minute requests from the Dubai team. Maya would be flying private later that morning. Jerome had made a different choice for this trip, one that reflected his hands-on management style. Instead of taking the company's Gulfstream, Jerome had booked a first-class ticket on Atlantic Airways, their largest competitor. He routinely flew on competitor airlines to evaluate their service, observe operational details, and experience the customer journey through fresh eyes. Today's flight would give him 3 uninterrupted hours to review confidential investor documents and rehearse his presentation while also benchmarking Atlantic's premium service. His driver arrived at 6:15, and they reached O'Hare International Airport by 7. Jerome had dressed casually in jeans, a plain black sweater, and glasses instead of his usual contacts. Without his tailored suits and in casual attire, People rarely recognized him, a fact that made these competitive intelligence missions much more effective. At the Atlantic Airways premium check-in counter, Jerome presented his ID and received his boarding pass with minimal interaction. The agent never looked up long enough to realize she was checking in the CEO of her employer's fastest-growing competitor. Jerome proceeded through the priority security lane and headed to the first-class lounge, where he found a quiet corner to continue reviewing documents. His phone rang again. It was Devon. The Sheik's team just requested updated projections on the Tokyo route launch. I've shared the models we prepared last month, but they want to discuss fuel hedging strategies specifically for the Asian market. I've got the fuel contract comparisons with me, Jerome replied. And the sensitivity analysis for yen fluctuations. Will be covered. After a productive hour in the lounge, the boarding announcement came for Atlantic Airways Flight 268 to New York LaGuardia. Jerome packed his documents into his monogrammed leather briefcase, a gift from his mother when he received his Harvard MBA, and proceeded to the gate. The gate agent scanned his boarding pass with a smile. "Enjoy your flight, Mr. Washington." Jerome boarded with the first group, nodding politely to the flight attendants who welcomed passengers at the door. First class was configured in a 1-to-1 layout, giving each passenger direct aisle access. Jerome's seat was 2A, a window position that would allow him privacy to work. He stored his briefcase in the overhead compartment, keeping only his tablet and the fuel hedging documents to review during the flight. After placing these items on his seat, he noticed a text from Maya requesting a quick call before takeoff. Jerome stepped back into the jet bridge for better reception, planning to return to his seat before the main boarding began. The call with Maya took longer than expected, as she shared new information about the Dubai Fund's recent aviation investments in Southeast Asia that might affect their negotiation strategy. By the time Jerome finished the call and returned to the cabin, main boarding was well underway with a steady stream of passengers filing through the aisle. As Jerome approached row 2, he noticed something unexpected. A woman with platinum blonde hair styled in an expensive bob was sitting in his window seat, tapping at her phone with manicured nails. His briefcase and documents had been moved to the aisle seat beside her. Jerome paused at row 2, momentarily confused by the scene before him. The woman in his seat appeared to be in her 50s, dressed in a cream-colored St. John knit suit with a Hermes scarf artfully draped around her neck. She didn't acknowledge his presence as she continued scrolling through her phone. "Excuse me," Jerome said politely. "I believe you might be in my seat." The woman glanced up briefly, her expression dismissive. "No, I don't think so. This is my seat." Jerome maintained his professional demeanor. "There might be some confusion. My boarding pass is for 2A, the window seat." Without looking up from her phone, the woman replied, "Mine is 2B, but I always get a window seat. I get claustrophobic in the aisle." Jerome noticed her boarding pass on the console between the seats. It clearly showed 2B, the aisle seat where she had placed his belongings. "I understand wanting a window," Jerome said, "but I specifically booked this seat to work during the flight. My documents are already set up here." The woman finally looked directly at him, her eyes moving from his casual clothes to his face with obvious judgment. "Look, I'm a Diamond Elite Plus member with over 2 million miles on this airline. I always get the accommodation I need." Jerome took out his boarding pass. "I'm happy to call a flight attendant to sort this out, but my pass clearly shows 2A. "Fine," the woman sighed with exaggerated patience. She pressed the call button, and moments later, a flight attendant named Amber Sullivan approached, according to her nameplate. "How can I help you?" Amber asked, directing her attention to the woman despite Jerome being the one standing in the aisle. "This man wants my seat," the woman said before Jerome could speak. "I've explained that I need the window for my anxiety, but he's being difficult." Jerome maintained his composure. "There's been a misunderstanding. I'm assigned to 2A. The lady has taken my seat and moved my belongings." Amber looked at Jerome with slight suspicion. "May I see your boarding pass, sir?" Jerome handed it over. Amber examined it and then looked at the woman's pass on the console. Ms. Whitley, he is correct. He's assigned to 2A, and you're in 2B. The woman, Ms. Whitley, according to the interaction, straightened her posture. As I explained to him, I'm a Diamond Elite Plus member. I need the window seat for my medical condition. I understand, Amber said, now addressing Ms. Whitley with deference, but seat assignments are final unless there's an aircraft change. This gentleman is within his rights to request his assigned seat. Jerome nodded. Thank you. I'm happy to. Do you know who I am? Ms. Whitley interrupted. Katherine Whitley. My husband golfs with your CEO regularly. I find it hard to believe Atlantic Airways treats its premium customers this way. The flight attendant's demeanor shifted noticeably. Of course, Ms. Whitley. Let me see what I can do. She turned to Jerome. Sir, would you be willing to take an aisle seat? Perhaps 2B would be acceptable. I specifically booked 2A for the privacy to work, Jerome explained calmly. I have confidential documents to review during this flight. Katherine Whitley scoffed. What kind of confidential documents could you possibly have? You don't look like you're heading to any important business meeting. The comment hung in the air, its implication clear to everyone within earshot. Several nearby passengers looked uncomfortable. One older gentleman in 1D raised his eyebrows. Ma'am, Jerome said quietly, my appearance has nothing to do with my seat assignment. Katherine turned to Amber. I don't appreciate his tone. And frankly, I question whether he even belongs in first class. Perhaps his boarding pass should be verified more thoroughly. Amber looked increasingly uncomfortable but didn't correct Katherine's behavior. Sir, I'm just trying to find a solution that works for everyone. The solution is simple, Jerome replied. The lady takes her assigned seat, and I take mine. I've already settled in, Katherine insisted. My belongings are stored, my medication is out. It would be a major inconvenience to move now. It was an inconvenience for you to move my things without permission, Jerome pointed out. Katherine's face hardened. Are you accusing me of something? I merely relocated items that were in my preferred seat. At this point, other passengers were openly watching the interaction. The boarding process had slowed as people hesitated to pass by the ongoing dispute. Is there a problem here? A male voice joined the conversation. A flight supervisor named Daniel Fletcher approached, likely called by another flight attendant who noticed the situation escalating. Amber quickly explained the seating dispute to Daniel. Katherine immediately launched into her version of events, emphasizing her loyalty status and medical needs while making pointed comments about Jerome's appearance and demeanor. He's being unreasonable and, quite frankly, intimidating, she concluded, though Jerome had not raised his voice or made any threatening movements. Daniel turned to Jerome. Sir, I understand you're assigned to 2A, but given Ms. Whitley's status and medical needs, would you be willing to accept a seat in our economy comfort section? We'd be happy to refund the fare difference. Jerome stared at Daniel in disbelief. You're asking me to give up my purchased seat because this woman took it without permission, and now you're offering me economy as a solution? It would be an upgrade to economy comfort, Daniel clarified, missing the point entirely. With extra legroom. That's not the issue, Jerome said. My assigned seat was taken, my property was moved without consent, and instead of resolving this according to your own policies, you're asking me to accept a downgrade. Katherine interjected, if first class is so important to you, perhaps you should book it when you can actually afford it regularly, not just as a one-time splurge. Jerome felt a familiar heat rising in his chest, the same sensation he'd experienced when professors at Harvard expressed surprise at his academic performance, when executives dismissed his business proposals, when store security followed him through luxury boutiques. But as always, he controlled it, knowing that showing anger would only reinforce stereotypes. My financial status is not relevant to this discussion, Jerome said evenly. What's relevant is that I purchased a specific seat, and airline policy entitles me to that seat. Several other passengers had now stopped pretending not to listen. An older black couple in row 4 exchanged knowing glances. A white businessman in 3C was frowning at Katherine. Daniel seemed eager to end the increasingly public dispute. "Sir, I understand your frustration, but at this point, accommodating Ms. Whitley would be greatly appreciated. As a goodwill gesture, we can offer you a voucher for a future first-class flight in addition to the fare difference refund." Jerome recognized the familiar pattern. His rightful claim was being dismissed to appease someone else's entitlement, and he was expected to accept compensation as if the principle didn't matter. The subtext was clear: his dignity was being assigned a dollar value. In that moment, Jerome made a calculation. He could continue arguing and likely be labeled as difficult or aggressive, potentially even removed from the flight. Or he could strategically retreat and address this situation differently. "Fine," he said, reaching over Katherine to retrieve his briefcase and documents. "I'll take the economy seat." Katherine smiled triumphantly. Daniel looked relieved. "Thank you for your understanding, sir. Amber will show you to your new seat and arrange the voucher." As Jerome followed Amber toward the economy section, he heard Katherine say to the passenger across the aisle, "Some people just don't understand how things work. They expect everything handed to them." Jerome took his downgraded seat in economy comfort, surrounded by passengers who had witnessed his humiliation. As the safety demonstration began, he opened his tablet and started typing a series of emails. His face revealed nothing of the fury and determination building inside him. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Jerome sat in his economy comfort seat, which was anything but comfortable for his 6'2" frame, and felt the familiar weight of injustice settle onto his shoulders. It was a sensation he knew intimately, one that had shadowed him throughout his journey from the South Side to the C-suite. He thought back to his freshman year at Andover, when his English teacher had accused him of plagiarism after he submitted an essay on Shakespearean economics that she deemed too sophisticated for him to have written. He remembered the investor who had withdrawn from an early funding round for Air Route after meeting Jerome in person, despite initial enthusiasm over his business plan. He recalled the country club in Chicago that had lost his membership application 3 times before Maya threatened legal action. His phone buzzed with a text from Maya, landed in New York. "Devin says Dubai team added 2 more people to meeting. All prep complete. How's your flight on the competition?" Jerome hesitated, then typed, "Educational. Will call when I land." Another text came through from Devin, Sheik's nephew added to delegation. "Passionate about aviation. Bring your A game." The flight attendant passing through economy didn't offer Jerome the premium beverage service that first-class passengers downgraded due to aircraft changes typically received. Another small indignity on top of the larger one. As Jerome reviewed his presentation on his tablet, he found himself unable to focus. The document blurred before his eyes as his mind kept returning to Katherine Whitley's smug expression and the flight crew's complicity in his humiliation. Would the Dubai investors look at him the same way? Would they see his accomplishments, his vision, his $12 billion company? Or would they, too, see only his skin color and make assumptions about his capabilities and worth? Jerome opened the in-flight internet browser and purchased Wi-Fi access. His first search was for Katherine Whitley Atlantic Airways. The results were illuminating. Katherine Whitley was not merely a privileged passenger but the senior vice president of client relations at Meridian Capital Partners, one of the largest investment firms in the country. More importantly, Meridian had recently established a partnership with United Global Airways, Air Route's main competitor for the Dubai investment. This couldn't be coincidence. Katherine Whitley would certainly recognize the CEO of Air Route Airlines, even in casual clothes. Unless, she hadn't known who he was initially but had been briefed about his travel plans. Perhaps she'd been opportunistic rather than strategic in taking his seat, but once she realized who he was, she deliberately escalated the situation. Jerome considered this new information carefully. Was this merely competitor reconnaissance or something more sinister? Either way, it changed the dynamics of the situation significantly. He opened the email app on his tablet and began composing a message to Maya and Devon, explaining the situation and outlining the beginnings of a plan that was forming in his mind. He attached links to Katherine Whitley's professional profile and recent news about Meridian's partnership with United Global. His fingers hovered over the send button. Was he overreacting? Was this response proportional to the offense? Or was he finally taking the stand that his younger self, the boy from the South Side who had swallowed countless indignities on his path to success, had always wished to take? What would you do if you were in Jerome's position? Has anyone ever disrespected you simply because of how you looked? Comment number 1 if you believe Jerome should remain calm and focus on his upcoming meeting, or comment number 2 if you think he should take action against the airline that disrespected him. Like and subscribe to find out what happens next in this incredible true story of power, prejudice, and the price of dignity. Do you think Katherine Whitley knew exactly who Jerome was when she took his seat? Or was this a case of everyday racism that happened to target someone with the power to respond? And what could a CEO of a major airline possibly do in response to this kind of treatment? The answer might surprise you. The wheels of Atlantic Airways Flight 268 touched down at LaGuardia Airport with a firm jolt that seemed to punctuate Jerome's resolve. Throughout the 3-hour flight, he had refined his strategy, making calls using the air phone and sending carefully worded emails when the flight attendants weren't watching. By the time the seatbelt sign turned off, Jerome Washington was no longer a man who had been humiliated. He was a man with a plan. As passengers stood to retrieve their belongings, Jerome remained seated, watching as Katherine Whitley gathered her designer handbag in cashmere wrap. She caught his eye briefly as she moved toward the exit, a smug smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She clearly believed their interaction was concluded, that her status and privilege had once again insulated her from consequences. Jerome waited until most passengers had deplaned before standing. As he made his way forward, he noticed Daniel Fletcher, the flight supervisor, standing near the cockpit, reviewing paperwork with the captain. "Excuse me, Mr. Fletcher," Jerome said, approaching them with measured steps. Daniel looked up, recognition flickering across his face. "Yes, sir. I hope the rest of your flight was comfortable. Customer relations will be emailing you about that voucher we discussed." Jerome smiled, not warmly but professionally. "I'd like to speak with you and the captain privately for a moment, if possible." Daniel glanced at the captain, who shrugged. "We have a tight turnaround, but we can spare a minute." "What's this regarding?" Jerome reached into his wallet and produced a business card, handing it to Daniel. "My name is Jerome Washington. I'm the founder and CEO of Air Route Airlines." Daniel's face drained of color as he stared at the card. The captain, a veteran airman named Robert Chambers according to his nameplate, raised his eyebrows in surprise. "I believe we have some matters to discuss regarding Atlantic Airways customer service policies," Jerome continued. "Particularly as they pertain to seat assignments and conflict resolution." "Mr. Washington, I had no idea," Daniel began, his voice suddenly hoarse. "That much was evident," Jerome cut in smoothly. "I'll be filing a formal complaint with your corporate headquarters, but I wanted to identify myself properly first." The captain stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mr. Washington, I apologize for any misunderstanding that occurred on my aircraft. If you'd like to discuss this further, perhaps we could arrange a meeting with our executive team." Jerome shook the captain's hand firmly. "That won't be necessary, Captain Chambers. Your executives will be reaching out to me soon enough, I expect." As Jerome turned to leave, Daniel called after him. "Mr. Washington, please understand, if we had known who you were." Jerome stopped and turned back slowly. "That's precisely the problem, Mr. Fletcher. Your treatment of passengers shouldn't depend on their perceived status or appearance. Every customer deserves the seat they paid for and basic human dignity. That's a lesson we emphasize at Air Route." With that, Jerome exited the aircraft, leaving behind a stunned flight crew who were just beginning to realize the magnitude of their misjudgment. In the terminal, Jerome's phone immediately began ringing. Atlantic Airways chief customer officer, a woman named Patricia Reynolds whom Jerome had met at industry conferences, was calling already. Word traveled fast. Jerome declined the call and texted his driver to meet him at arrivals. As his town car navigated through Queens toward Manhattan, Jerome called Maya. "You're not going to believe what happened on my flight," he began. Maya listened without interrupting as Jerome recounted the incident in detail, including his discovery about Katherine Whitley's connection to their competitors. "That's outrageous," Maya said when he finished. "But unfortunately not surprising. What do you want to do?" "We should still have time to prepare for the Dubai meeting." "Change of plans," Jerome replied. "I'm heading to our New York office instead. Have Devin reschedule the Dubai team for tomorrow morning." "Jerome, this is the meeting we've been working toward for months. The Sheik's team doesn't like last-minute changes. Tell them I've been unavoidably detained dealing with an industry matter that requires immediate attention." "It's not a lie." Maya was silent for a moment. "What are you planning?" "Meet me at the office in 30 minutes. Bring Devin. We need to talk strategy." Jerome ended the call and gazed out the window at the Manhattan skyline coming into view. By now, Katherine Whitley had likely reached her destination, still unaware that her casual cruelty had set in motion events that would soon rock the entire airline industry. When Jerome arrived at Air Route's New York offices in Midtown, Maya and Devin were waiting in the conference room. Maya, ever efficient, had already ordered lunch and set up a secure line for their discussion. "You look too calm," Devin observed as Jerome entered. "That's when you're most dangerous." "Tell us everything again," Maya said, "including what you're thinking of doing." Jerome removed his jacket and took a seat at the head of the table. "Atlantic Airways just demonstrated everything that's wrong with the airline industry: entitlement, discrimination, and poor conflict resolution. They're also working with Meridian Capital to undermine our Dubai deal." "You can't know that for certain," Devin cautioned. "Katherine Whitley could have been acting alone." "Either way," Jerome continued, "this presents an opportunity. We've been playing nice, competing on service and efficiency. But today made something clear: respect in this industry isn't given, it's taken." He outlined his plan while Maya and Devin listened intently. By the time he finished, Devin looked concerned while Maya was nodding slowly. "It's aggressive," Maya acknowledged. "The board will have questions." "The board hired me to build this airline into an industry leader," Jerome responded. "Sometimes that requires bold moves." "This is more than bold," Devin countered. "This is declaring war on a competitor 3 times our size over a personal slight." "No," Jerome said firmly. "This is recognizing that our competitor's culture is fundamentally flawed, which makes them vulnerable. And it's demonstrating to the industry that Air Route stands by its principles, even when it's costly to do so." Before either of his executives could respond, Jerome's phone rang. It was Patricia Reynolds from Atlantic Airways again, her third call in the past hour. This time, Jerome answered, putting the call on speaker. "Patricia, Jerome Washington here." "Jerome, thank you for taking my call." Her voice was tense with forced pleasantness. "I've just been briefed about an unfortunate misunderstanding on one of our flights today. I wanted to personally express our deepest apologies. I appreciate the call, Patricia, but I wouldn't characterize racial profiling and seat theft as a misunderstanding." "Of course not, and that's not how we see it either. Atlantic Airways has zero tolerance for discrimination of any kind. The employees involved will be retrained immediately." "Retrained?" Jerome repeated. "Not disciplined or terminated?" Patricia hesitated. "We're conducting a full investigation to determine appropriate action. In the meantime, we'd like to offer you lifetime Diamond Elite Plus status and unlimited first-class upgrades as a gesture of our sincere regret." Jerome exchanged glances with Maya and Devin. "That's generous, Patricia, but it doesn't address the systemic issues at play. Your staff sided with an entitled passenger over a legitimate customer because of how I looked. That suggests cultural problems that extend beyond a few individuals. Jerome, I assure you this incident doesn't reflect our company's values. Our CEO, Michael Thornton, would like to meet with you personally to discuss how we can make this right. Tell Michael I'll be in touch, Jerome replied. I need to address some pressing business matters first. After ending the call, Jerome turned to his team. They're panicking, which means they understand the potential fallout. Let's proceed with the plan. Maya was already typing on her laptop. I'll activate our network. Devin, start the financial arrangements. We need to move quickly before they realize what we're doing. As his executives sprang into action, Jerome felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. For the first time in his career, he wasn't swallowing an injustice or accepting inadequate compensation for disrespect. He was responding with the full force of the power he had spent a lifetime accumulating. By evening, the pieces were in motion. The first calls from industry insiders were already coming in, asking why Air Route was suddenly acquiring landing slots at key airports and canceling long-standing agreements with Atlantic Airways. The business press had begun noticing unusual trading patterns in airline stocks. Jerome's phone rang again. This time, it was Katherine Whitley herself. Mr. Washington, she began without preamble, her voice considerably less confident than it had been on the plane. I've just been informed of your identity. There appears to have been a misunderstanding earlier today. No misunderstanding, Ms. Whitley, Jerome replied calmly. You took my seat, moved my belongings without permission, made racist insinuations about my presence in first class, and used your perceived status to manipulate airline staff. Everything was quite clear. I never mentioned race, she protested weakly. You didn't have to. Your meaning was unmistakable to everyone present. Katherine paused. Mr. Washington, I represent Meridian Capital. We're always looking for promising investment opportunities, and your airline has an impressive growth trajectory. Perhaps we could meet to discuss potential collaboration. Jerome almost laughed at the transparent attempt to neutralize him. That's an interesting pivot from this morning's behavior, Ms. Whitley. But I'll have to decline. Air Route is quite selective about its business partners. He ended the call and looked up to find Maya watching him with a mixture of admiration and concern. You realize this is just the beginning, she said. Once they understand what we're doing, they'll fight back with everything they have. Jerome nodded. I'm counting on it. Sometimes you need to force a confrontation to achieve real change. As night fell over Manhattan, Jerome Washington stood at the window of his office, watching the lights of the city glimmer like stars fall into earth. Tomorrow, the airline industry would wake up to a new reality, one where disrespect carried a price too high for anyone to casually inflict. Dawn broke over New York City as Jerome finished his fourth cup of coffee. He, Maya, and Devin had worked through the night, executing their strategy with military precision. They had taken turns napping on the office sofa, but adrenaline and purpose had kept them mostly alert as they orchestrated what industry insiders would soon be calling the Washington Offensive. At 6 a.m., Jerome's first move became public. Air Route Airlines announced the acquisition of 73 prime landing slots at major airports across the country, slots previously held by Atlantic Airways under temporary leases that were up for renewal. Jerome had been monitoring these opportunities for months but had planned to pursue them gradually. Now, he had activated his network of industry contacts and leveraged Air Route's substantial cash reserves to secure them all at once. By 7:30 a.m., financial news networks were reporting unusual activity in airline stocks. Atlantic Airways shares had dropped 7% in pre-market trading, while Air Route was up nearly 5%. At 8:15 a.m., the second phase of Jerome's plan activated. Air Route issued a press release announcing the immediate termination of all code-sharing agreements with Atlantic Airways. These agreements had allowed the airlines to sell seats on each other's flights, creating a mutually beneficial relationship that enhanced route networks for both carriers. The press release cited irreconcilable differences in customer service philosophy as the reason for the termination. CNBC wants you live at 9, Maya informed Jerome as she ended a call with their media relations team. Bloomberg at 9:30. Fox Business at 10. Jerome nodded, straightening his tie. He had sent his assistant to his Manhattan apartment to retrieve one of his signature bespoke suits, a charcoal gray Tom Ford with subtle blue pinstripes. Today, there would be no mistaking his status or authority. "What's our message for the interviews?" Devin asked, reviewing talking points on his tablet. "We stick to business fundamentals," Jerome replied. "This is about Air Route's strategic growth and commitment to customer dignity. We don't mention yesterday's incident specifically." "And when they ask about the timing?" Maya pressed. "I'll say that recent interactions with Atlantic Airways revealed fundamental incompatibilities in our business philosophies that made continued partnership untenable." At 8:45 a.m., Jerome's phone rang. It was Michael Thornton, CEO of Atlantic Airways. "Jerome, what the hell are you doing?" Michael demanded without preamble. "You're throwing away years of mutually beneficial cooperation over a seating misunderstanding?" Jerome's voice remained measured. "Good morning, Michael. This isn't about a misunderstanding. This is about recognizing that our companies have divergent values that make us incompatible business partners." "This is about Katherine Whitley taking your seat," Michael countered. "I've spoken with her and the flight crew. It was an unfortunate incident, but hardly worth destroying a profitable business relationship." "If that's your assessment of the situation, you've just confirmed my decision was correct," Jerome replied. "When your employees chose to accommodate entitlement over contractual rights, and when they made assumptions based on appearance rather than facts, they were acting according to your company culture. That's not a culture Air Route wishes to be associated with." "You're overreacting," Michael insisted. "Let's meet face to face and work this out like reasonable businessmen." "I am being reasonable," Jerome said. "I'm making business decisions based on revealed values and strategic considerations. Atlantic Airways has shown it doesn't respect certain customers. Why would I expect it to respect business agreements when they become inconvenient?" Michael's tone hardened. "You're making a serious mistake, Jerome. Atlantic Airways has resources and connections you can't match. If this is war, you won't win." "This isn't war, Michael. It's consequences. There's a difference." As Jerome ended the call, Devin looked up from his computer. "Atlantic is calling an emergency board meeting. Their stock is down 12% now." "And Katherine Whitley?" Jerome asked. Maya checked her phone. "Our contacts at Meridian Capital confirm she's been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation. Apparently, their compliance department is concerned about potential securities implications given the stock movement." Jerome nodded, satisfied with the rapid developments. "What about our Dubai investors?" "Still scheduled for tomorrow morning," Devin confirmed. "They're intrigued by the market movements. The Sheikh's nephew apparently follows airline stocks as a hobby and has been texting me questions about our strategy." At 9 a.m. sharp, Jerome appeared on CNBC's Squawk Box via remote link from Air Route's New York offices. The hosts immediately pressed him on the dramatic moves against Atlantic Airways. "Mr. Washington, your company has taken several aggressive actions against Atlantic Airways in the past 12 hours. Can you explain the strategic thinking behind these moves?" Jerome smiled confidently. Air Route Airlines has always been focused on long-term growth through strategic acquisition of key assets and alignment with partners who share our values of efficiency, innovation, and respect for every customer. Our recent moves reflect an acceleration of our established strategy, not a deviation from it. "But the timing seems sudden," the host persisted. "What changed overnight?" "In business, timing is everything," Jerome replied smoothly. "The landing slots we acquired were coming up for renewal, and we determined that securing them aligns with our expansion plans. As for the code-sharing agreements, we regularly evaluate all business partnerships to ensure they serve our core mission." Recent interactions with Atlantic Airways revealed fundamental incompatibilities. The interview continued for 15 minutes, with Jerome deftly handling questions without ever mentioning his personal experience or directly criticizing Atlantic Airways. To viewers, he appeared as a confident CEO making bold but rational business moves. Only those with inside knowledge would connect these actions to yesterday's incident. By midday, the situation had escalated further. Industry analysts were publishing reports speculating about Air Route's aggressive expansion and what it meant for the competitive landscape. Atlantic Airways stock had fallen nearly 20%, triggering circuit breakers that temporarily halted trading. At 1:30 p.m., Jerome received an unexpected call from a blocked number. It was Katherine Whitley. "Mr. Washington," she began, her voice tight with stress, "I hope you're satisfied. I've been suspended pending an investigation that could end my career." "Ms. Whitley," Jerome replied calmly, "your career challenges are the result of your own actions, not mine." "This is completely disproportionate," she exclaimed. "Yes, I took your seat. Yes, I made assumptions I shouldn't have. But I've apologized, and now my entire professional life is in jeopardy." "Interesting," Jerome observed. "When you believed I was just an ordinary black man who didn't look like I belonged in first class, you had no concern for the impact of your actions on my dignity or my day. Now that consequences have arrived at your doorstep, you suddenly understand the concept of proportionality." Katherine was silent for a moment. "What do you want from me?" she finally asked, her voice smaller. "Nothing," Jerome answered honestly. "This isn't about you personally anymore. This is about setting a standard for how people should treat each other, regardless of appearance or perceived status." After ending the call, Jerome turned to find Maya watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" he asked. "You're enjoying this," she observed. "Not just the business strategy, but the justice of it." Jerome considered her words. "I wouldn't call it enjoyment. Satisfaction, perhaps. For once, someone who thought they could dismiss me based on appearance is experiencing real consequences." Speaking of consequences, Devon interrupted, looking up from his laptop. "Social media is exploding with this story. Someone on the flight posted about the incident, and it's gone viral. People are connecting it to our business moves against Atlantic." Jerome checked his own phone and found dozens of notifications. The hashtag #RespectCostsMore was trending, along with #AirRouteJustice. "We didn't start this narrative," Maya noted, "but it's certainly helping our cause. Public sentiment is overwhelmingly on your side." As the afternoon progressed, more developments unfolded. 3 major airports announced they would be reviewing all gate assignments, potentially giving Air Route access to premium terminals previously dominated by Atlantic Airways. 2 celebrities tweeted about switching their preferred airline to Air Route, praising the company's stance against discrimination. At 4:30 p.m., Jerome received another call, this time from Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan, the head of the Dubai Sovereign Investment Fund. "Mr. Washington," the Sheikh began in his refined English, "I must say you've made our investment decision process most interesting. My analysts have been watching today's developments with great interest." "Sheikh Abdullah," Jerome replied respectfully, "I apologize for rescheduling our meeting. I look forward to discussing our partnership tomorrow." "Actually," the Sheikh said, "I'm calling to suggest we move our meeting up. My team and I would like to meet with you this evening, if possible. Recent events have convinced us that Air Route Airlines possesses exactly the kind of bold leadership we seek in our portfolio companies." Jerome exchanged glances with Maya and Devon, who were listening to the call on speaker. Maya gave an enthusiastic thumbs up. "We would be honored to meet this evening," Jerome confirmed. "Excellent," the Sheikh replied. "And Mr. Washington? My nephew tells me that in addition to your business acumen, you've demonstrated something even more valuable, the courage to stand for dignity. In my culture, this quality is highly prized." As Jerome ended the call, a notification appeared on his phone. Atlantic Airways had issued a press release announcing that flight supervisor Daniel Fletcher and flight attendant Amber Sullivan had been placed on administrative leave pending an investigation into customer service protocol violations. The company also announced a comprehensive review of its conflict resolution policies and diversity training programs. "It's working," Devon said, reading the same news. "They're actually making changes." "It's a start," Jerome agreed. "But we're just beginning." By the close of the trading day, Atlantic Airways stock had fallen 23%, while Air Route had gained 11%. The financial impact of Jerome's actions had already cost Atlantic Airways billions in market capitalization. As Jerome prepared for the evening meeting with the Dubai investors, he reflected on the day's events. What had begun as a personal humiliation had transformed into a powerful statement about corporate values and consequences. For perhaps the first time in his career, Jerome felt the full weight and responsibility of his influence, and the satisfaction of using it to force meaningful change. The following morning, Jerome stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of Air Route's Manhattan office, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in hues of gold and amber. The meeting with Sheikh Abdullah and his team had extended late into the night, concluding with handshakes and enthusiastic promises of partnership. The Dubai Sovereign Investment Fund was not only proceeding with the planned $3.5 billion investment but had increased their commitment to $5 billion, impressed by Jerome's strategic vision and principled leadership. "The board meeting starts in 5 minutes, Maya reminded him, entering his office with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Jerome and studied his expression. "You look surprisingly rested for someone who got maybe 3 hours of sleep." Jerome accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "I feel clear. Like I've finally aligned my personal values with my business decisions completely." "Well, get ready to defend those aligned values," Maya warned. "Harrison and the conservative faction are worried about potential blowback." The term disproportionate response has been thrown around. The emergency board meeting began promptly at 8 a.m., conducted via secure video conference. As expected, Harrison Wilson was the first to speak after Jerome provided a brief update on the Dubai investment. "While I appreciate securing the Dubai fund's increased commitment, I must express concern about the aggressive actions taken against Atlantic Airways," Harrison began, his silver hair and bow tie projecting old-school corporate authority. "What began as a personal incident has escalated into what some might view as corporate vengeance. This creates potential liability exposure and reputational risk." Jerome had anticipated this line of argument. "Harrison, I understand your concerns. But characterizing our actions as vengeance misrepresents the situation. What occurred on that Atlantic Airways flight wasn't merely a personal slight, it was a demonstration of systemic failures in corporate culture that directly contradict our own values." Nevertheless, Harrison persisted, grounding all code-share flights without notice, acquiring their landing slots, and essentially declaring war on a major competitor seems excessive in response to one unfortunate incident. Letitia James, the former federal prosecutor who served as Air Route's general counsel, spoke up. "Actually, from a legal perspective, all actions taken were within our contractual rights and business prerogatives. The code-share agreement included a 30-day termination clause for irreconcilable business philosophy differences, which is precisely what Jerome cited. And let's be clear about something," added Dr. Regina Thompson, the former economics professor who had been one of Air Route's earliest investors. "What Jerome experienced wasn't an unfortunate incident. It was textbook discrimination, facilitated by corporate policies that empower entitled customers at the expense of others' dignity." As the discussion continued, Jerome listened carefully to each board member's perspective. The 12-person board was divided, with older members generally expressing caution while younger directors supported the aggressive strategy. After nearly an hour of debate, Jerome raised his hand for attention. "I appreciate everyone's input," he began. "But there's something important I need to announce. This morning, at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, Air Route Airlines will be temporarily grounding our entire fleet for a 24-hour system-wide customer service training initiative." The announcement was met with stunned silence, followed by an eruption of questions and concerns. "Grounding our fleet?" Harrison exclaimed. "That will cost millions in revenue." "Yes," Jerome acknowledged calmly. Approximately $78 million, according to our projections. But sometimes principles must take precedence over immediate profits. What principles justify such an extreme measure? Another director demanded. The principle that respect is non-negotiable, Jerome replied firmly. The training will ensure that every air route employee, from baggage handlers to flight attendants to executives, understands that we will never compromise on treating all customers with equal dignity, regardless of appearance, status, or background. The market will punish this decision severely, Harrison warned. Perhaps initially, Jerome conceded. But in the long term, this commitment to our values will distinguish us in the marketplace. The Dubai investment team certainly thought so. Before anyone could respond, Jerome's phone buzzed with a news alert. He glanced at the screen and smiled slightly. It seems we've been preempted, he announced to the board. CNN is reporting that an internal video has leaked showing Katherine Whitley explicitly discussing me in racist terms after I left the first-class cabin. Atlantic Airways stock has been halted again after dropping another 15% in pre-market trading. The news shifted the tenor of the board meeting immediately. Even the most cautious directors recognized that Jerome's actions now appeared prescient rather than excessive. By the meeting's end, the board had voted 10-2 to support Jerome's strategy, with only Harrison and one other director dissenting. At precisely 9 a.m., Air Route's Operations Center sent the ground stop order to all aircraft. Flights already in the air would continue to their destinations, but no new Air Route planes would take off for the next 24 hours. The company's website and social media channels simultaneously released a statement explaining the unprecedented action. Air Route Airlines is temporarily suspending operations for a comprehensive, company-wide training initiative focused on customer dignity and conflict resolution. We believe that in the modern aviation industry, respect is as important as punctuality, and dignity as essential as safety. We apologize for any inconvenience to our valued customers and appreciate your understanding as we work to make air travel more respectful for everyone. The announcement sent shockwaves through the airline industry and financial markets. Air Route stock initially plummeted, then began to recover as analysts and commentators debated the long-term implications of the bold move. Social media exploded with reactions, most of them supportive of what many called the most expensive stand against discrimination in corporate history. At Meridian Capital Partners, Katherine Whitley sat in a sparse conference room, waiting for her disciplinary hearing to begin. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from colleagues and friends who had seen the leaked video of her post-incident comments about Jerome. The most damning line, "They let anyone in first class these days, even if they look like they should be handling the baggage," had been playing on news channels all morning. Her career, built over 25 years of strategic networking and calculated advancement, was crumbling before her eyes. The investment firm's compliance department had already determined that her actions violated their code of conduct. Now they were assessing whether her behavior constituted a terminable offense. Katherine's phone rang. It was Harold Whitley, her husband. "The club is asking me to resign my membership," he said without preamble, his voice tight with suppressed fury. 30 years as a member, and they're pushing me out because of your indiscretion." "Harold, Save it," he interrupted. "Just tell me how to make this go away. Who do I need to call? What donation needs to be made?" Katherine closed her eyes, finally understanding what Jerome had tried to tell her. "I don't think this one can be fixed with money or connections, Harold. For once, there are actual consequences." Meanwhile, at Atlantic Airways headquarters, an emergency executive session was underway. CEO Michael Thornton faced his leadership team, all of whom looked shell-shocked by the rapid deterioration of their company's position. "Our call centers are overwhelmed," reported the chief marketing officer. "Cancellations are up 300%. Corporate accounts are demanding to know our response to the video. The Dubai fund has withdrawn from preliminary discussions about a potential investment," added the CFO. "They've indicated they're pursuing exclusive negotiations with Air Route." Michael Thornton rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a migraine. "How did we get here? One seating dispute has escalated into an existential crisis for this airline. It wasn't just a seating dispute, the company's newly hired diversity officer pointed out. It was a visible manifestation of unconscious biases that have been embedded in our corporate culture. Mr. Washington simply had the power to make us face consequences for those biases. "What's our next move?" asked the COO. Air Route has effectively positioned themselves as the airline that values dignity enough to sacrifice profits. How do we counter that narrative? Before anyone could respond, Michael's assistant entered the room with an urgent message. "Sir, Jerome Washington is on line 1. He says it's regarding a potential resolution." The room fell silent as Michael put the call on speaker. "Jerome, you have my entire executive team here. What resolution did you have in mind?" Jerome's voice filled the room, calm and measured. "Good morning, Michael. I'm calling to propose a meeting between our leadership teams. Not through lawyers or intermediaries, but face to face. It's time we discussed the future of the airline industry and the role dignity should play in it." Michael exchanged glances with his team. "And what would be the agenda for this meeting?" "Meaningful change," Jerome replied simply. "The kind that transforms not just policies on paper, but behaviors and attitudes throughout the industry." "And in return?" "In return, Air Route would consider restoring certain business relationships with Atlantic Airways, provided specific conditions are met." After a brief discussion with his team, Michael agreed to the meeting, scheduled for 3 p.m. that afternoon at a neutral location, the conference center of the Four Seasons Hotel. As the morning progressed, the story continued to dominate news cycles and social media discussion. Industry experts debated whether Jerome's actions represented a new model of corporate activism or an expensive overreaction. Civil rights leaders praised Air Route's stand, while some business commentators questioned the wisdom of sacrificing shareholder value for principle. By noon, unexpected allies had emerged. 3 other airlines announced they would be implementing enhanced anti-discrimination training for their staff. A major hotel chain pledged to review its conflict resolution protocols. Even a prominent tech CEO tweeted, "What at Jerome Washington and at Air Route are doing is forcing all of us to examine how we handle power, respect, and dignity in business. It's uncomfortable but necessary." At 2:45 p.m., Jerome, Maya, and Devon arrived at the Four Seasons for the meeting with Atlantic Airways. As they entered the hotel lobby, Jerome noticed a familiar face, Katherine Whitley, sitting alone at the bar, nursing what appeared to be a whiskey. Jerome paused, then made a decision. "I'll meet you upstairs," he told Maya and Devon. "There's something I need to do first." He approached Katherine, who looked up with surprise and then visible discomfort as she recognized him. "Ms. Whitley," Jerome said, taking the seat beside her. "I didn't expect to see you here." Katherine's hand trembled slightly as she set down her glass. "Mr. Washington. I suppose you're here to witness the final dismantling of Atlantic Airways leadership." "Actually, I'm here to find a path forward that benefits the entire industry," Jerome corrected her. "Including addressing the culture that enabled your behavior." Katherine looked at him directly for the first time. "I've lost my job, my reputation, and possibly my marriage. Isn't that enough consequences for one seat assignment?" Jerome shook his head. "This was never about punishing you specifically. It was about confronting a system that has allowed people like you to behave that way without consequences for generations. The fact that you're experiencing consequences now isn't because I'm particularly vindictive, it's because the world is finally changing." He stood to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Ms. Whitley, I hope you use this experience to grow, not just to suffer. True accountability should lead to transformation, not just punishment." As Jerome walked away, Katherine called after him, "Mr. Washington. For whatever it's worth. I am truly sorry." Jerome nodded once in acknowledgement, then continued toward the elevators and the meeting that would determine the future relationship between Air Route and Atlantic Airways, and potentially reshape the entire airline industry's approach to dignity, respect, and consequences. The Four Seasons Hotel's Tribeca suite had been transformed into a neutral negotiation ground. A large oval table dominated the center of the room, with water pitchers, notepads, and pens meticulously arranged at each seat. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Manhattan, a reminder of the high-stakes world in which this negotiation was taking place. Jerome, Maya, and Devin entered precisely at 3 p.m. to find Michael Thornton and his executive team already seated on one side of the table. The tension in the room was palpable. Atlantic Airways stock was still in freefall, and the company faced not just financial damage but potentially irreparable harm to its brand. "Thank you for agreeing to this meeting," Jerome began as his team took their seats opposite the Atlantic Airways executives. "I believe we have an opportunity today to transform a crisis into progress." Michael Thornton's face remained impassive. "Let's be clear about something first, Jerome. While we acknowledge that Ms. Whitley's behavior and our staff's response were completely unacceptable, your retaliation has been disproportionate by any business standard. You've cost our shareholders billions in market value." Jerome leaned forward slightly. "This isn't retaliation, Michael. It's a long overdue reckoning. For decades, the airline industry has operated with a culture that treats certain passengers as inherently more valuable than others, not just in the services offered but in the basic respect afforded to them. We have extensive non-discrimination policies," Atlantic's chief human resources officer interjected defensively. "Policies aren't practices," Maya countered. What happened to Jerome wasn't an isolated incident. It was the predictable outcome of a system that empowers certain customers to demand special treatment while teaching staff to make snap judgments based on appearance. The discussion continued with increasing intensity, as Atlantic's team defended their company culture while acknowledging the specific failures in Jerome's case. For nearly an hour, both sides seemed to be talking past each other, with Atlantic focused on damage control and air route insisting on fundamental change. Finally, Jerome raised his hand, silencing the heated exchange. "Let me be direct about what we want from this meeting." He slid a document across the table to Michael. "This is our proposal for an industry-wide anti-discrimination initiative. It includes mandatory training for all customer-facing staff, revised conflict resolution protocols that emphasize customer rights regardless of status level, a third-party audit of discrimination complaints, and transparency reporting on resolution outcomes." Michael scanned the document, his expression skeptical. "You expect us to implement all of this because of one incident?" "No," Jerome replied firmly. "I expect you to implement it because it's the right thing to do. Because it will make your airline better. Because in the long run, treating all customers with dignity is good business." "And if we agree to this," Atlantic's general counsel asked, "what do we get in return?" Jerome glanced at Maya and Devin before responding. "Air Route will gradually restore code-sharing agreements over a 6-month period, contingent on verified implementation of the initiative. We'll issue a joint press release announcing our collaborative effort to improve industry standards. And we'll consider partnerships on international routes where such cooperation benefits both airlines." Michael conferred quietly with his team before responding. "Your terms are extensive and would require significant investment on our part. We need something more immediate to stop the bleeding of our stock price." "That's not my primary concern," Jerome stated plainly. "But I understand your position. Here's what I can offer immediately: if you commit to this initiative today, I'll publicly acknowledge Atlantic Airways' leadership in addressing industry-wide issues. That endorsement alone should help stabilize your stock." The negotiation continued for another 2 hours, with both sides modifying terms, debating implementation timelines, and occasionally reaching impasses that threatened to derail the entire process. Throughout it all, Jerome remained calm but unyielding on the core principles of the initiative. At 5:45 p.m., a commotion outside the conference room interrupted their discussion. Jerome's assistant entered with urgent news. Katherine Whitley was requesting to address both teams. After a brief consultation, both Jerome and Michael agreed to hear her out. Katherine entered the room looking noticeably different from the entitled passenger who had taken Jerome's seat. Her carefully maintained composure had given way to something more authentic and vulnerable. "I appreciate you allowing me to speak," she began, her voice slightly unsteady. "I've spent the past 24 hours facing consequences I never imagined possible from what I considered a minor incident. My actions cost me my job, damaged my reputation, and forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself." She turned specifically to Jerome. "Mr. Washington, what I did to you was wrong. Not just taking your seat, but the assumptions I made, the way I spoke to you, and how I leveraged my perceived status to get my way. I've spent my career believing that power and privilege were rewards I'd earned, not advantages I'd been given." Katherine then addressed the entire room. "This negotiation shouldn't be necessary. The fact that it took someone of Mr. Washington's stature and influence to force accountability shows how deeply flawed our systems are. If he had been any other black passenger without a billion-dollar company behind him, I would have faced no consequences, and he would have had no recourse." The room fell silent as the truth of her words settled over both teams. Even Michael Thornton, who had been defensive throughout the negotiation, appeared reflective. "Ms. Whitley," Jerome said finally, "thank you for your honesty. It takes courage to acknowledge one's mistakes so publicly." Katherine nodded. "I'd like to offer something constructive. Before my departure from Meridian Capital, I was developing a corporate training program on unconscious bias in client relations. I'd be willing to contribute that framework to whatever initiative emerges from this meeting, not for compensation or rehabilitation of my image, but because it's the right thing to do." After Katherine left, the negotiation took on a different tenor. Atlantic's team became noticeably more engaged with the substance of the anti-discrimination initiative rather than focusing solely on mitigating their financial damage. By 7:30 p.m., they had reached a comprehensive agreement. Atlantic Airways would implement all elements of the initiative, starting with immediate diversity and customer dignity training for all staff. They would issue a public apology for the incident involving Jerome and acknowledge their commitment to systemic change. Air Route would gradually restore business relationships as Atlantic met implementation milestones, and both airlines would co-sponsor an industry conference on equity and dignity in air travel. As the meeting concluded, Michael Thornton extended his hand to Jerome. "This isn't how I would have chosen to address these issues, but I can't deny the outcome is long overdue." Jerome accepted the handshake. "Sometimes progress requires disruption, Michael. The important thing is where we go from here." After the Atlantic team departed, Maya turned to Jerome with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You could have destroyed them completely. Why the compromise?" "Because destruction wasn't the goal," Jerome replied, gathering his papers. "The goal was change, meaningful, lasting change that improves the industry for everyone. Sometimes that requires a show of force, and sometimes it requires extending a hand once you've made your point." As they left the hotel, Jerome's phone buzzed with a news alert. The first reports of the agreement between Air Route and Atlantic Airways were hitting the financial press. Atlantic stock had already risen 11% in after-hours trading on rumors of the deal. "You know," Devon observed as they entered their waiting car, "historians might look back on this as the moment when corporate America finally began taking discrimination seriously, not because it was morally right, but because someone finally made it expensive to ignore." Jerome gazed out at the city lights beginning to illuminate the darkening sky. "If that's what it takes to create change, I can live with that legacy." 1 month after the historic agreement between Air Route and Atlantic Airways, Jerome Washington stood at a podium in the grand ballroom of the Javits Convention Center in New York City. Before him sat over 500 airline industry executives, government officials, civil rights leaders, and media representatives who had gathered for the first annual Aviation Dignity and Inclusion Summit. "Welcome to what I hope will become a transformative tradition in our industry," Jerome began, his voice carrying confidently through the packed room. 1 month ago, a seemingly minor incident on an airplane catalyzed a movement that has already begun to reshape how we think about customer service, corporate responsibility, and human dignity. The audience listened intently as Jerome recounted, for the first time publicly, the complete story of what had happened on Atlantic Airways Flight 268 and the extraordinary chain of events that followed. What could have remained a private humiliation instead became a public reckoning, he continued. Not because I sought vengeance, but because I recognized an opportunity to address systemic issues that have plagued our industry for generations. In the front row sat Michael Thornton, who nodded respectfully as Jerome acknowledged Atlantic Airways' commitment to change. Beside him was Katherine Whitley, whose unexpected role in the aftermath had evolved from villain to advocate. After losing her position at Meridian Capital, she had dedicated herself to corporate bias training, leveraging her insider understanding of privilege to help others recognize their own blind spots. Today marks not an ending but a beginning, Jerome declared. The Aviation Dignity Charter that we unveil today, co-signed by 17 airlines representing 68% of global air traffic, commits our industry to concrete actions that will ensure every passenger is treated with equal respect, regardless of appearance, status, or background. The charter, developed collaboratively by Air Route, Atlantic Airways, and a committee of industry experts, established new standards for conflict resolution, employee training, discrimination complaint handling, and transparency reporting. It also created an independent industry oversight board with authority to monitor compliance and issue public assessments. As Jerome concluded his remarks and invited Michael Thornton to the stage, he reflected on the remarkable changes of the past month. Atlantic Airways had implemented comprehensive anti-bias training for all 47,000 employees, revised their conflict resolution protocols, and created a new executive position focused exclusively on equity and inclusion. Flight Supervisor Daniel Fletcher and Flight Attendant Amber Sullivan, after completing intensive training, had been reinstated with new roles focused on helping implement the company's reformed practices. Air Route's temporary grounding, which had initially been criticized as an expensive publicity stunt, was now being studied in business schools as a case study in values-based leadership. The $78 million in revenue sacrificed during the 24-hour training period had been more than offset by the company's subsequent growth, as customers increasingly chose Air Route for its demonstrated commitment to dignity. The Dubai Sovereign Investment Fund's $5 billion investment in Air Route had been finalized, accelerating the airline's international expansion. Sheikh Abdullah had personally attended the signing ceremony, praising Jerome as a leader who understands that principles and profits are not mutually exclusive. Most significantly, other industries had begun examining their own practices in response to the airline industry's public reckoning. Hotel chains, retail corporations, and financial institutions were implementing similar training programs and accountability measures, recognizing that in the social media age, incidents of discrimination could quickly escalate into existential business crises. After the summit's opening session concluded, Jerome found himself approached by an unexpected visitor, Harrison Wilson, the Air Route board member who had initially criticized his response to the incident. "I owe you an apology, Jerome," Harrison said, extending his hand. "I thought you were sacrificing business interests for personal vindication. I didn't understand that you were seeing a bigger picture than the rest of us." Jerome accepted the handshake with a smile. "We all have our blind spots, Harrison. What matters is being willing to recognize them when they're pointed out." Later that evening, Jerome hosted a private dinner for his executive team and key allies in the Dignity Initiative. As they celebrated their progress, Maya raised her glass in a toast. "To Jerome Washington," she said, "who taught an entire industry that respect costs more than money, but disrespect costs even more." The group clinked glasses as Jerome shook his head modestly. "The real victory isn't what we've accomplished in the past month," he responded. "It's what happens next. It's the passenger who never has to experience what I experienced because we changed the system. It's the flight attendant who feels empowered to do the right thing rather than defer to status. It's the industry that recognizes dignity as a non-negotiable element of service." The following morning, Jerome boarded an Air Route flight to Chicago. As he settled into his first-class seat, he noticed several passengers and crew members recognizing him with smiles and nods of respect. The flight attendant who welcomed him aboard wasn't deferential because of his status as CEO, but genuinely warm in the way Air Route staff now treated all passengers. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Jerome gazed out at the terminal where, just 1 month earlier, he had stood watching his grounded fleet and wondering if his principled stand would prove effective or merely expensive. Today, that terminal bustled with air route aircraft preparing for destinations around the world, each one carrying not just passengers but the promise of an industry transformed. His phone buzzed with a final message before takeoff, a news alert announcing that Atlantic Airways board had unanimously approved Katherine Whitley's appointment as the company's first chief inclusion officer, completing her remarkable journey from symbol of privilege to champion of equity. Jerome smiled as he switched his phone to airplane mode. Sometimes the most powerful consequences weren't punitive but transformative. Sometimes justice looked like change rather than retribution. And sometimes, a single moment of standing firm for dignity could ripple outward to affect countless lives. As the aircraft lifted into the clear blue sky, Jerome Washington closed his eyes, content in the knowledge that while his personal humiliation had been temporary, the dignity revolution it sparked would endure far beyond his lifetime. What do you think about Jerome's approach to handling discrimination? Would you have had the courage to take such a bold stand if you were in his position? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to be reminded that standing up for dignity is always worth it, no matter the cost. Thank you for watching, and remember that your voice and actions can create positive change in this world. Until next time. Jerome Washington's story reminds us that sometimes standing up for dignity requires extraordinary measures. While most of us don't have the power to ground an airline, we all face moments where we must choose between accepting disrespect or demanding better treatment. The story illustrates how systemic discrimination persists even for successful individuals and how accountability often requires leverage. Jerome used his position not for revenge but to create lasting change, understanding that meaningful transformation comes from making discrimination expensive for businesses. His approach demonstrates that principles and profits aren't mutually exclusive. Companies that prioritize dignity ultimately thrive. Most importantly, the story teaches us that individual actions can catalyze widespread change when we refuse to accept the way things are, and instead envision how things should be. True leadership means using power to lift standards for everyone, not just yourself. What moment in Jerome's journey resonated with you the most? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination and wished you had the power to respond as Jerome did? Share your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like this video if you believe in standing up for dignity, and subscribe for more powerful stories about overcoming injustice. Share with someone who needs a reminder that their voice matters, even against powerful systems. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes respect costs more than money, but disrespect costs even more.